Well, the Pentagon releasing some new video after the U.S. dropped the largest non-nuclear bomb ever used in combat on an ISIS complex in Afghanistan. Did the strike accomplish its goal? It's a big question today. Michael Waltz, a former Green Beret commander and counterterrorism advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney, also a Fox News contributor, joins us. That is a key question, Michael. It's great to have you back on the program. But sure, you have a very unique perspective that I want you to share with our viewers before we launch into some of these, bigger, I don't want to say philosophical, but they are big questions. You've spent a great deal of time in this area, this particular area in Afghanistan. Just tell us a little bit about your experience. What was it like there? What do you think our viewers should know?
Yeah, that's right. I actually even have a chapter in my book, Warrior Diplomat, about Achin district, where this strike occurred and where, unfortunately, we lost a Green Beret just this last weekend. It's an incredibly mountainous area. I mean, we're talking the foothills of the Hindu Kush that lead eventually to Mount Everest. These caves and tunnel complexes have been there since the Mujahideen were fighting the Soviet Union back in the early 80s. They're built into the side of the mountain. You can only reach them by foot, and even then, they're very narrow kind of mountain paths carved into the side of the mountain, single file. Any defender could see you coming a mile away and could rake you with all kinds of small arms fire and heavy fire if you tried to go in by foot. If you tried to go in by helicopter, those helicopters would be incredibly exposed and you would easily be facing a Black Hawk Down type scenario. So I think just to elevate a little bit, General Nicholson made the right call. He had either two choices, either let ISIS continue to grow and fester and build its capability in this mountainous area, or take them out by the air, and he chose the right ordinance. What has me a little bit disturbed, but not surprised given the last 8 years, is people in Washington debating what type of bomb a four-star general decides to use.
Why does that disturb you?
I'm sorry?
Why does that disturb you in any way? Why do you not like that?
Because I think, we've seen over the last 8 years hand-wringing, frankly, from the White House over an over-concern of civilian casualties. Look, our commanders on the ground and our operational 3-4-star commanders understand fully the downside and the problem with having civilian casualties when you need to win hearts and minds, aside from the humanitarian standpoint. That's the last thing they want to do. They look at it carefully. They will have Predator drones over the area beforehand to make sure civilians aren't in the way. And I personally have made decisions not to drop ordnance dozens of times when I thought there would be too much collateral damage. The point is that we can make those decisions out in the field. We're professional soldiers who understand our mission. That doesn't need to be micromanaged from Washington. And I'm thrilled to see our commander-in-chief powering those authorities down so they can make the calls like they just did yesterday.
And some of that criticism, that critique of the last 8 years and that administration actually extends beyond that into the Bush administration as well. Michael, you know that because there have been those that are fighting on the ground that say, just as you did to our viewers, we know where the bad guys are. We know exactly where they are. They've been there for years. Yeah. But we haven't gone after them in this way. The question is, why haven't we?
Well, I think the bigger issue is we need to be setting, in Washington and in capitals, the broader strategy of what does success look like? What does it look like in Afghanistan? What resources do we need to apply to achieve those goals? And what's the strategy to get there? General McMaster is on his way out to Kabul right now in the middle of that strategic review, which I'm also happy to see, to engage with commanders directly and say, okay, we've been into this for 15 years. Right. How are we going to get to success?
Can the strategic review just be, let's go kill the bad guys? Like, can it just be that for once? Because at this point, we've been in this war for however so long. How many of our own men and women have died in it? Why can't that be the strategy? Is that what this is telling us?
Well, that's right. So, I mean, I think you're going to continue to see an advisory effort to help the Afghans be able to, and the Afghan army to be able to stand up on their own. But there's a huge diplomatic and political piece there in particular with a very fragile unity government. And then you've got a regional piece in the sense that I think you're going to see a much tougher line on Pakistan for its continued support of the Taliban. All of that has to come together in a broader strategy. And even that, I'm sorry, Jenna, but that has to be nested in a global strategy for how do we undermine this ideology of extremism.
I'm sorry to interrupt. My producers want me to wrap, but I'm going to ask you one more question.
Sure.
Just really quick, and that has to do with Pakistan.
Yeah.
In light of what we saw in Syria and the Tomahawk missiles that we launched, there was a great deal of response from a myriad of different countries. Russia, Syria, Iran. We have all these different statements coming from governments. There have been zero official statements from anyone about this launch, and silence means something. I'm curious what you think it means.
Well, I think it means everybody's sitting back and is sitting back and on notice. You know, it's not necessarily that we would use this type of ordinance in other places. It just wouldn't apply. It wouldn't work. But when you tack it on with the Tomahawks, with the Carl Vinson sitting off the North Korean coast, and I think what they're really taking notice of is the speed with which this president listens to his national security professionals, makes a decision, and moves out for a battlefield or a strategic messaging effect. I think is changing everybody's calculus.
Very interesting. I beg forgiveness from our producers. But I want our viewers to hear from someone who has actually spent some time in the country, because there's a lot of people that come on and talk about this that haven't spent any time in Afghanistan. It's important in your perspective, Michael. So great to have you.
Walk back around, Jenna. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
All right.